During research this summer, I found that there's a lot of struggling with resistant or so-called resistant, so-called analytical or difficult clients. I had almost forgotten, but not farther than 5 years ago, I did too. So I know this very well firsthand, and here's what I found that was missing. There's no such thing actually as resistant clients, but resistant techniques, tools, and scripts when we try to fit everyone into these boxes. I know it is not done in purpose and all that, but here's my little input about one of the most frustrating experiences for a lot of practitioners in this field. So you're in a session, you suggest a technique, you guide your client through it, and they just don't respond. Or they seem to comply in the session or during the session, but nothing changes later on. So what we do is we start thinking the general conclusion. Here's another resistant client or difficult analytical, can't be hypnotized client. We know that conclusions, even though most of the time influenced by school, by past experiences or comparison, create, let's say, difficult situations. And you know what? As I was saying, before I understood what was really happening, I was caught in this trap, so to speak, too. So here's the truth that changed everything for me. When a client seems resistant, it's not that they're always refusing to change. They're doing actually exactly what they always do. So think about it. All people do is what they usually do. So the so-called resistant client is just being themselves, acting in their usual patterns. The uncomfortable truth, let's say, but still eye-opening, is we are trying to fit them into our toolbox, into our techniques, into our scripts. And I get the point that that's happening because, of course, we also shouldn't buy into the conscious narrative or focus on it primarily. But if we actually start thinking about one of the most fundamental principles in the therapy, that is, every single client is an individual, then we'd realize, of course, some techniques work for some people and not for others. Of course, your script that worked beautifully for your last client doesn't work for this one because they're different people with different experiences, different baggage, different internal worlds. Now, you'd think probably the depth of trance in this case is the problem, and that is not either. I know the definition of passing the critical factor so we can have access to the unconscious, because then there wouldn't be a resistance. The thing is that the subconscious is even more stubborn than the logical conclusions. Trying to fit someone into a toolbox, even when there's a depth of trance, you will interrupt the unconscious doing what only it does best at those moments. By using techniques, the subconscious will resist. And it's, let's say, as if it's saying, okay, since you interrupt me, you must be smarter than me, so go on, figure it out yourself. Let me give you a real common example. You have a client who seems to be a pleaser, let's say. They agree with everything you say. They nod. They say, yes, that makes sense. They do the exercise perfectly in the session. You think, great, this is going well. But then they come back, and in a lot of cases, they are back the next week and nothing changed. The problem is still there. They say, for example, that they forgot to do the homework, or they did it, but it didn't really work. What we have done here is, first and foremost, we have interrupted the processing after the session. And even if it started doing its job, you know, it's still being interrupted, you know, bringing them back after a week. But since this is not the main theme for this topic or video, let's move on and come back to what's probably happened. So they were playing along because that's what people that please do. They comply on the surface, but they weren't actually engaging in the real work. work. And I'm not saying here that that's right or wrong. It's something that we are not going to speak about here, but it's just what they do. Now, with a traditional approach based on techniques and tools, how would you know? You can't, because the technique requires the client's cooperation, and they are giving you the cooperation on the surface. So we know the real problem is underneath, it's unconscious, and what could have happened to, apart from interrupting the processing, is that the technique probably never touched the real problem. Here's what's really happening. They need to feel in control. And this is another example with the analytical client. They want to understand everything. They question your direction. They say things like, I'm not sure if I felt anything. How do I know if I'm doing it right? And that means that maybe they've had experiences where they lost control. Maybe they've been told what to do their whole life. Maybe they've been hurt by trusting too quickly. And of course, they can't just relax, let go, trust, or follow our instructions. Of course, then there will be resistance. So the technique could be triggering, for example, what we should be aware of, the exact thing that their unconscious is trying actually to protect them from. So despite the well-meaning intention to help a person, we could end up trying to figure what can we do better. So what's the answer? In organic conversations in hypnotherapy, there are 3 core principles that eliminate all these narrative of resistance. 1, you go into a session without preparing or planning anything. So you have no expectation of what should happen whatsoever. And if you don't have this kind of expectations, you can't be disappointed by resistance. You see, and that is also because the approach does not require tools or techniques. So you never ask or tell the client what to do. This is the second thing. Instead, the client gives you unconscious hints about where they are and what needs to happen. By following those hints or expressions, cues, you do not dismiss but acknowledge the unconscious experience. Why then would it resist when you acknowledge it? And 3, you approach with an open and genuinely curious mind, no prejudice, no judgment. You're not analyzing whether they are doing it right or going deep enough. You're simply noticing what's happening and getting curious about it. So when you work this way, resistance disappears. Why? Because you're not pushing anything onto the client that their unconscious needs to defend against. You're not saying, do this technique. You're saying, I notice you just said X. Tell me more about that. You're not saying relax or go deeper. You're saying, what's happening for you right now? How is it for you to have this and that? The client stays in control. They are the expert on themselves, which they are. And you're helping them discover what they already know unconsciously, so they can become aware and have some conscious choice there. I've seen this transformation happen over and over and over again. So, for example, the analytical client who couldn't be hypnotized suddenly has profound insights when you stop hypnotizing them and just get curious about their analysis. The resistant client who wouldn't do your suggestions suddenly changes when you stop suggesting and start following their unconscious expressions. The difficult client who kept coming back without progress suddenly has breakthroughs when you stop working with their conscious story and start working with their unconscious slips. So it's not about having better techniques. It's about working from principles that honor each individual's unique internal world, which with best intentions, and that's how we enter a session, but there are obstacles which come in a form of so many tools. I will close this video by saying that this is also one of the pillars Erickson worked from too, and he kept reminding the practitioners that every person has more resources than they realize. And the other thing is that people are much more resilient, that how it appears to the surroundings, so to us as well, until they become more aware to come and ask for help. Think about this. They had long gone over their primary experience. So tools and techniques will fit sometimes, but they need another experience that will override the need for those defensive mechanisms stored in their nervous system for something that deeply in their core, they know they don't need it anymore, though the tools will, in most cases, not be creating the experience for a real breakthrough. So this was it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it and take what you can from it, and see you soon in the next one.